everybody. Welcome to the world's greatest Bronze Age comic book podcast, Flea Market Fantasy. I'm your co-host, Mike L, and as always, I'm joined by...
Michael Dell of the LCS Hockey Radio Show.
That's right, and guess what time it is? It's Shocktober! Third annual, I think, right?
Third
annual. Yeah.
Least, yeah.
Yeah, and to celebrate, we have a very special guest with us, don't we?
Well, Mike, first of all, explain what Shocktober is.
Oh, well, for those that don't know, Shocktober is a little play on the words shock and October, and it's to celebrate Halloween.
I didn't necessarily need you to explain that.
Oh,
just
okay.
like what we do.
The theme is Halloween or horror-themed comic books.
Yeah.
And, you know, sometimes the picks that we have match that theme, and sometimes they don't, by accident.
Well, yeah, this one's a little questionable. It's on the line. Line. But I think it gets there at the end. I think there's definitely horror elements there. So our special guest this evening is a big fan of Shocktober. He's author and raconteur Miles Watson.
Raconteur, that's what I really am.
That's right.
That's what I'm known for.
Miles Watson. Now, Miles Watson, you picked the book this week, and it's one you actually owned. And it's
I do. I'm looking at it right now, as a matter of fact.
Wow.
The Unknown Soldier, issue 261 from 1982. This is a DC Comics book. It's a war book, and you love the war books. You've written a couple novels about the war, World War II. What was the first one? Sinner's Cross, The Very Dead of Winter. You can go and buy them on Amazon.com, 19books.com. You'll love them. So, Miles, it sounds like when you were a kid, you even liked war stuff.
That is true. Actually, I did a ton of... When I was a kid, I did Sergeant Rock. I did Haunted Tank. I did all that. I did GI Combat. I was a big fan of all those World War II comics. They were quite popular. At least I thought they were quite popular. I actually don't think they were all that popular, but Unknown Soldier was one of them.
They seem to have long runs, all those war books, right?
They did. Sergeant Rock certainly did. I mean, that's kind of a legendary exercise. But the other one, some of the others that I read, like GI Combat and stuff like that, I think were a little more on the obscure side. I don't know how much. I mean, Unknown Soldier had a massive run numbers-wise.
Well, we'll get into that in a minute.
Yeah, we'll get into it.
Because it's a little misleading.
Yes, it's a lot misleading, actually.
Yeah.
But
a little bit. Mike L., did you ever hear of the Unknown Soldier?
Well, I've read every issue of Who's Who cover to cover. So I've definitely heard of Unknown Soldier, although this is probably the first actual comic I've read with Unknown Soldier.
Yeah, I never knew this character existed. But the Unknown Soldier, the character, is symbolic of the nameless soldiers who have fought throughout America's wars. He is the man who no one knows, but is known to everyone. Right. He also has the nickname of the Immortal GI. GI. Now, Miles, did you know all that? Like, you're a big Unknown Soldier guy?
actually, I didn't. No.
Oh, all right. Sure. Well, the Unknown Soldier, his first appearance was in a book called Our Army at War, issue 168 in 1966. And Miles, he actually appeared in a Sergeant Rock story in that book.
I didn't know that either. I would actually be interested in reading that one.
The character was created by Robert Kanigher. Is that how you say it, Michael? Kanigher?
I think so, yeah.
And Joe Kubert. Good old Joe Kubert. And after that appearance in Our Army at War, the next time you saw him, he started receiving his own ongoing stories in Star-Spangled War Stories from issues 151 to 204, and that was from 1970 to 1977. And then with issue 205, Star-Spangled War Stories then became The Unknown Soldier, because it just started featuring him. So that's why the series, we're reading 261 today, the series lasted until issue 268 in 1982. So it seems like, wow, The Unknown Soldier had 268 issues. No, not really. He had 63 or so. But still, it's a hell of a run, The Unknown Soldier. And in 1988-89, he also had a 12-issue limited series written by Jim Owsley, Mike Allen.
Oh, nice.
And drawn by Theo Gascone. I don't know who that is. I'm probably pronouncing that name wrong. And then in 1997, there's a 4-issue limited series written by Garth Ennis and drawn by Killian Plunkett. And that was under the Vertigo imprint. And then in 2008, there's a second ongoing series, also published under Vertigo. It lasted for 25 issues, written by Joshua Dysart and drawn by Alberto Ponticelli. And they updated the story. It was set in Uganda. In like the Ugandan Revolutionary War or whatever.
Really?
That's interesting. So, Miles, what do you know about the Unknown Soldier, the character, that you can tell us?
Well, actually, very little, because I actually this is kind of a funny story. The very last Unknown Soldier, and I guess this is a spoiler to all the millions out there curious about the Unknown Soldier. I actually read his final story first. The first Unknown Soldier I ever read was the story in which he dies.
Well, there's debate whether he's dead at the end.
Yes, I get it. But
would you like to explain how that story goes?
Yeah, it's in the final days of the Third Reich, and the Unknown Soldier goes into Berlin. I have it around here somewhere. And he ends up, he goes through all this. It's actually a pretty well-written story, considering that the Unknown Soldier wasn't exactly sticking to historical truths, one might say. But he goes into Berlin. He's doing the things, he's on a mission. And it's a really bloody story. There's a number of German agents that he meets up with who are anti-Nazis, and one by one they all get killed, and he's getting angrier and angrier. And he ends up, Hitler has developed this thing called Nosferatu, which is like these horrible octopus monster hybrids that he's going to drop on the Allies to save himself.
Wow,
yeah. So he goes in specifically to prevent that from happening, and he ends up having a death battle with Hitler. And Hitler's beating him, and then the memory of all the people that were killed on this mission that gives him enough strength, and he kills Hitler. And then the Unknown Soldiers. I should say this. His conceit is that in addition to being good with a gun and hand-to-hand combat and all that, he is capable. His face is mutilated. He wears bandages, but he can disguise himself as anybody. He's a master of disguise.
Yeah, his face was obliterated by a grenade in the Philippines when he was serving in the Philippines during World War II, and he was fighting the Japanese army there. And a grenade went off, killed his buddy, and messed up his face. So he always see him. His entire head is wrapped in bandages every time you see him.
Yes, but his thing is he can transform into anyone. So he transforms into Hitler, and then he gives orders that the Nosferatu are to be destroyed. And then he's escaping, but there's the Allies are bombing the crap out of Berlin, and he sees some little German girl, I guess, or something, who's about to be blown up by a bomb, and he runs over to save her and saves her, but he is killed in this heroic act of saving this civilian. So it was this was my first experience with the guy, and I was like, good God. I mean, it's a very violent story. There's a ton of killing. There's all kinds of crazy stuff going on. People get threatened with being hanged on meat hooks. It was what the hell am I reading here? It was a lot more intense than I was used to reading from their standard DC comic, because DC was always a little lighter. One might say a little lighter in its delivery than Marvel. They tended to go for pure good evil stories. You had Superman, who's of course sort of the ultimate Boy Scout, and so I was not prepared for the brutality of the Unknown Soldier. But I ended up buying a number of the Unknown Soldier comics, and this one came to mind because it is Shocktober, and it's a very horror-y-ish story.
Yeah, two other points about that final story with Hitler. Yeah, he kills Hitler, and then, like you said, he disguises himself as Hitler, and then he stages Hitler's suicide because he wanted to make Hitler look like a coward. So that's what he did that then, and then he escapes. And then you think he dies in that explosion when he saves the little girl. But I guess one of his gimmicks is that because his face is so mutilated and covered in scar tissue and stuff, when he wears these masks, they itch. So he scratches his face a lot. That's a tick he has. So then, I guess in one of the final panels of that issue, they show another soldier, and he starts itching his face. So you're like, oh, there. he's still alive.
Very cool.
So, yeah, that's that. But he sounds like a interesting character, though.
I would say, yeah, definitely.
I like this guy.
And I do think that DC's war titles were fairly well selling, or
yeah,
popular.
Sergeant Rock was around forever, right?
Right. Like all of them lasted well into the 80s, I think, right? And then they kind of just, unfortunately, they all waned in popularity. So
now, some people think this Unknown Soldier fella, because they never really announced his name, but some people think his name is Eddie Ray, and he was a character that appeared in Star Spangled War Stories issue 153, and so they think that's who the Unknown Soldier is. That's the
interesting.
prevailing theory. That's yeah, it's a good character. Who's the guy in isn't there a guy in Doom Patrol that also has his whole face wrapped in bandage?
Oh yes, that's Negative Man.
Negative Man.
Yeah.
Hey, by the way, I think the writer of this book, Bob Haney, is co-created Negative Man.
I thought that was Arnold Drake. Am I wrong? Or maybe he came later. I'm not sure.
Yeah, because Bob Haney says he co-created Doom Patrol, and the guy who created Doom Patrol says no, you didn't.
That's one of those. Gotcha.
Yeah, but you did help co-create Negative Man. Though. He admits that.
Okay. Yeah, look at this. Created by Arnold Drake, Bob Haney, and Bruno Premiani. Okay, so yeah, you're right. Yeah. They're all mixed in there.
Yeah, so the writer here is Bob Haney. The artist is Dick Ayers. Hey, Miles, remember when we did that Sergeant Fearing is Howling Commandos? That was drawn
I remember.
That was drawn by Dick Ayers as well, I believe.
God, that was awful.
That was great. I enjoyed that. Remember that right in the middle of the war, they're doing card tricks to trick the Nazis?
That was painful. That was actually painful to read in places. There were times when I was just like, why does this exist? Why was it written? Why am I here? It sent me down an existential rabbit hole.
So if you want to know more about Dick Ayers, go listen to that Howling Commandos episode. I'm sure we talk all about Dick Ayers there. Hey, this Bob Haney fella, he was born in 1926 in Philadelphia. He sadly passed away in 2004 at the age of 78. He served in the Navy during World War II, and he saw action in the Battle of Okinawa. How about that?
That's pretty cool.
He returned to the States and graduated from Columbia University. He broke into comics in 1948. He did a bunch of stuff. Mike, he's probably most famous. He co-created the Teen Titans.
Yes, that's right.
And he also co-created that fellow Metamorpho.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you're aware of his reputation.
I am not.
Well, he's just kind of known as, you could say, the quintessential 60s DC writer that is considered today to be completely out of date and like wacky. Complete disregard for continuity. He would write for example, he wrote a series called The Super Sons, which was about Batman and Superman's sons, even though they didn't have sons, like things like that. But in more recent years, he's been reevaluated, and people like him more now. And the Batman Brave and the Bold cartoon that came out in the 2000s is mainly based on his version of Batman. So
there you go.
Yeah.
And he wrote a bunch of the Star Spangled War Stories, which featured the Unknown Soldier. And then he wrote, I think, pretty much every issue of the Unknown Soldier.
Oh, cool.
The end there. So, all right. I think that's all I know about the Unknown Soldier. That's all I can do. So I guess let's look at the cover, Michael.
Sure. Hold on a second. I gotta click back here. So we got a pretty cool cover here. The Unknown Soldier, nice little logo here, and feel free to jump in if you guys want to help. But we got this kind of devil.
Well, the unknown part, the Unknown Soldier, it kind of looks like maybe it's wrapped in bandages, but not really.
Yeah, a little bit. There's like these little lines around the edges of the letters. You're right, and then the soldier part is more just like a typical 3D kind of, it's almost like 80s font. That's the only way I can describe it. It's like super modern font, and the Unknown looks older. So we got this like devil creature fighting these Nazis, and that's pretty much it.
Well, you could give a little more description of that.
Okay, and then in the background there is a kind of outline of the Unknown Soldier's face, like a like outline, And then we see that they're inside like a castle, and there's like bricks for the castle, and there's these little what are those called, those traps with the spikes? Not like an Iron Maiden, but
yeah, it is a little Iron Maiden-y, but it's just there for effect, but it's kind of cool actually.
Yeah. And we should point out this is Joe Kubert, and this is and then there's a little insert box plus enemy ace versus enemy ace. And then at the bottom of the main image, we see a splash, and it says, "Is this a fiend from hell or the immortal warrior's greatest disguise?"
Yeah, now this devil creature, he's like a big red furry demon-looking guy with giant yellow horns on his head. Now, Miles, as soon as you saw this, you thought Shocktober.
I did, and I should actually give a tiny amount of background on this. I remember discussing this comic and bringing it to school when I was in elementary school.
Oh, really?
And I don't remember exactly when is the. I have the thing in my hand here. When is the date? Let's read the date here. 1981.
Oh, I thought
okay.
It was
well, yeah,
so 1981. That might just be Unknown Soldier, Volume 31. No, you're right. 82, but then there's a 81 by DC Comics. That's beneath it. You're right. 82. Yeah. So I would have been about 9 or 10 when this came out. And I brought it in and we discussed it at school. There was intense discussion of the devil creature because we were a little surprised because this is a very supernatural theme, and Unknown Soldier tended to be, it was pretty grounded in the sense of like he was a spy. And he was fighting World War II against Germans and Japanese and all that stuff. So this was a departure, and it definitely came to mind when I thought of Shocktober, because when you see this cover, this is not your standard World War II story. There's a horned, fanged demon with clawed feet fighting a bunch of Germans, Nazis, actually. On the cover. So I was like, what the crap? And when I read it, I remember thinking, this is really kind of a gory, brutal story for how short it is. It's very not World War II-y. It's much more of a straight horror story. It's really more in keeping, in my mind, with the, those kind of almost like Crypt Keeper style tales of EC Comics, where some bad guys do bad things and then they get punished by a thing that's much worse than them.
Yeah, the end definitely gets very horror-y. Get there, but spoiler alert: people drown in blood.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like the cover. It's a demon monster. So that's it. Joe Kubert. He's always good to look at. So yeah. Unknown Soldier. All right, so we flip it open, Mike L, and we get the big splash page again. DC used to do this weird thing where their opening splash page would always be like a preview of the issue to come.
Right. Well, the first thing we see is we got this awesome logo, the Unknown Soldier, and it's like completely different font than the cover, and we've got his face in the middle of the logo. It's really cool. And we open up with a scene of him getting mail. Yeah, this is kind of like a weird, it's like the splash page is kind of below this, but whatever. So it's two panels that open it. It's a close-up of him looking at a photo of a character named Lady Jade, and she's actually completely naked. You can see her nipple.
Oh, wow, look
if you look close. If you look close. Anyway.
Yeah, it's covered in shadow. She's shot from the back, and she's looking over her right shoulder. So most of her body's in shadow. Yes. Mike L could still find that nipple.
Yeah, that's impressive. I'm not going to lie.
Yep. So anyway, and he's freaking out. He's like, no doubt about it, soldier. It's Lady Jade being tortured by the SS. And then Unknown Soldier's like, Jade in Nazi hands. No. And he's like smashing like the wall. And then below that, it shows kind of like what Mike Dell was saying, like a splash page, Hour of the Beast. And we see this like devil creature kind of like coming over like a hill. And in the background, we see like a castle and some trees and stuff. And so then
House of the Beast.
Yeah.
Or Hour
of the Beast. Hour of the Beast. Yeah. House of the Beast. There you go. And then we cut over. And now this is weird. We get a little flashback introducing us to Lady Jade. And it's a little confusing because in panel 1, this looks like an interesting adventure. He's He's like captured and he's like rowing on a boat like a slave. He's chained to like the oar. And then Lady Jade is like, you will break and beg Jade for mercy for death itself. And he's like, never. Oh, you witch.
And she's whipping him.
Yeah, she's whipping him. She's whipping him. And then the next panel, Jade, I love you. He's like trying to like kiss her in a bed. It's like, well, what happened in between these two panels, right? So then it says at the bottom, note, as told especially, epically, in Unknown Soldier issues 254 and 255. Instant classics.
Instant classic.
Were you going to say something?
I liked that. I like that.
Yeah, it's great. Very enticing, right?
I just worry about this this poor Unknown Soldier fella. His whole face is wrapped in bandages, and he's apparently working tirelessly on a slave ship. You know, he's going to be sweating, and those bandages. I mean, that's going to lead to infection, right? I mean, you got to change those bandages.
Yeah, that's true. So then GI Unknown Soldier is talking to, I guess this is his boss. Who is this? I don't know.
Yeah, it's one of the guys he works with.
Right. And he explains what's hhappened is the Japs have captured Jade.
Michael, please.
We're going to use racial slurs in this episode,
Good Lord,
okay?
Michael.
Yeah.
Let me just point out that was not written in the comic book.
Yeah.
I apologize to our listeners. Good God.
So anyway, the Japanese, but it does say the Japs. The Japs then turned her over. Okay, so basically the Japanese have captured Jade, turned her over to the Germans, and the boss shows Unknown Soldier the castle where she's been taken. Chateau Dax in France. And hold on a sec here. And then...
Well, Unknown Soldier wants to go rescue her, and he says, no, you can't go. You're too important. You could die. So I'm going to put you under arrest.
Right.
So,
but then he's like, screw that. And he punches both of these soldiers in the face that are trying to arrest him. And he takes off. Yeah. And he's in London. So then he makes his way to, I guess this is a friend's house.
Yeah, it's an allied. It's a safe house with his buddy. What's her name? Mrs. Doolittle.
Yeah, she's like Miss Moneypenny.
Okay, cool. That's what I was thinking. Yeah, it's kind of cool. So then he's like, okay, well now I've got to put on a disguise to get into this castle. So it has to be more than a disguise. It has to be a complete metamorphosis. And so he basically becomes like a Quasimodo, like hunchback, right?
Yeah. This is a bold choice.
What's that?
It's a bold choice.
Yeah, yeah.
The Quasimodo hunchback.
And then this is still like the Moneypenny character. She's like, "Oh, soldier, is that you? Nine, my dear Fräulein Doolittle. I am Kalkenstein, SS torturer extraordinary. Now I am off to Frankenreich." So then we see him like driving in a car and like sneaking in, and like he's got like a fake pass to get past the guards, the Nazi guards, and then he makes his way into the castle.
But again, it has to be very uncomfortable to drive the car as a hunchback.
Yeah, I would say you're right. And so now he's talking to like an officer inside the castle, and he's like showing him his fake pass, and then the officer is kind of bringing him along, and we see him walking along the castle. We see like a dog, and like there's a nice little attention to detail here. We see like someone who's been chained to the wall, and now they're just a skeleton. Like it's pretty cool. And then he's brought into the room where the naked Lady Jade is tied to a post, right, where she's been tortured.
She's completely naked. Her hands are handcuffed behind her back, and she's like bent over like a
wooden slab. Yeah.
Now, Miles Watson, when you brought this book into school, did your teachers have anything to say about this?
We did not share
the naked lady being
comment with teachers. Teachers are the enemy.
Of course. But when I saw this, I'm like, wow, this is pretty
risque.
Yeah, for 1982 DC, this is pretty rough here.
Right.
Yeah, it really is, actually. In retrospect, at the time, being like 9, we were probably less interested in the risque aspects of it than we were just in the straight violence.
So the Unknown Soldier, Michael, he has to pretend to torture her, but he actually does torture her. He's like,
right. So he pulls out an electrical impulse thing give her pain, but then he kind of whispers into her ear, "Forgive me, my love, but I must do this to ensure victory." And he basically electrocutes her until she passes out, right?
Well, actually, on the little electrodes, there were some sort of knockout drops as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so she passes out. Hold on a sec here. Every time I click, I get 15 pop-ups, so just give me a second here.
Yeah,
So
for once, I'm lucky enough to avoid them by using the actual comic.
Yeah, good call. So then, and then this is the funny thing is they actually are expecting the unknown soldat to come, which is the unknown soldier, right?
Mhm.
And then unknown soldier in disguise is like listening to all this, and he's like, "Huh, okay." And so then he makes a note in his head and his thoughts. He's like, "Huh, I count 6 stairways, but there are 7 towers. That means there must be either a secret way to the 7th tower, unless it's completely sealed off." And he's like trying to think of a plan here. So then we cut back over to back inside with Lady Jade again, completely naked. We should point that out. And then all of a sudden, in the middle of them all talking, the officer's like, "Okay, time for another kiss of pain for the witch, Herr Kalkenstein." And then he pulls out like this knockout gas, right, and releases it. And then they all get knocked out, and then he pulls off his disguise, and Lady Jade realizes it's actually the unknown soldier.
One other bit of dialogue I'd like to mention when they're first going into Lady Jade's chamber there to torture her the first time, that evil Nazi officer says, "Now I take you to your victim. The she-cat has resisted all my ... tender caresses."
Yeah, good point.
Oh, yeah.
What a creep.
But can I point something out here?
Yeah.
The Lady Jade tortured the crap out of the unknown soldier,
Yes, good point.
and he loved it, apparently.
Yeah.
So
Hey, don't
there's
judge.
some
Don't judge. You know?
there's some undercurrents to the storytelling here that are quite amusing. Like they're like, these fiendish Nazi torturers are just the worst people in the world, but Lady Jane can have people literally on a galley whipping them and saying that they'll beg for death. But he falls in love with her. Why doesn't he fall in love with these Nazi torturers? I'm confused.
Good point.
By the way, her name is Lady Jade, and he meets her in China, but she looks like a Caucasian woman.
That's true. Interesting. So I also have to point out it's not like he pulls off his bandages and puts the mask on, then puts the bandages on or whatever. No, the mask goes over the bandages. So when he pulls the mask off, it's just bandages, right?
Yes.
Which is fantastic.
Yeah, it's awesome. So then he's like, "Okay, we got to get going." So we see them walking down like the hallway, and then the Nazi officer is.
And by the way, she's still naked. He didn't.
I didn't want to say it, but she's completely still naked.
He could have took your coat off and given it to her.
Good point. Good point.
Yeah.
At least use the mask, right, to cover up something. I don't know. So yeah.
Cover up one boob.
Yeah.
Mask.
So he's shooting, and they're like escape down the side of the castle, and then he brings her to the 7th tower. He's like, "Oh, which we have to pray von Bach has no inkling of." So he's assuming that they don't even know how to get into it or even that it exists, right?
Yeah, I'm confused how he knew where the entrance was.
Yeah.
He get into it. Miles, can you explain that? I don't...
Yeah.
What, that he didn't know where it was?
How did he know how to get into that 7th tower?
Well, my guess is this. He was able, with MacGyver-like deductive ability, to somehow, because isn't this find them, they must not escape? It's not drawn all that clearly, but isn't he climbing up the side here, carrying Lady Jade with him?
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Into the 7th tower? Yeah, find them, they must not escape. He's actually physically climbing the side of the turret, and then he comes in through the window of the 7th tower.
Okay, yeah, because you know what? I didn't even see them climbing the tower. I just thought it was an establishing shot of the outside of the tower. But yeah, there they are climbing up. Yeah, kind of tough to tell, but.
Yeah, so he makes his way in, and so then the Nazis are looking for him. And then, now this is weird. So it cuts to outside. Is this the same group?
Yeah, well, it's that evil Nazi officer who she refused his tender caresses, and he notices that there's blood on
Right.
the windowsill and the outside of the tower, and he's like, "Oh, that must be where they went." So
Right. So they look across, yeah, they see, and then they're like, okay, break through, so they're like smashing the wall. And then Unknown Soldier turns around, and Jade now looks completely different. Now she's dressed like, I don't know how you describe this, like a
kind of like a
fairy?
Yeah,
Yeah,
like
a
Robin Hood
fairy
times,
princess. Yeah, yeah,
Lady
something.
Marian or whatever. Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, and then all of a sudden, this beast appears, like
Well,
the devil.
It's the costume of the beast.
Yeah. Yes,
It's on
hanging in the
costume.
dimness, almost like a living thing, a shaggy pelt of what bizarre beast. And this is the one that was on the cover. And so he puts the costume on, and then he's like, "Ma Bell, we have no reflections." Of course, Mon. I should know how to pronounce this, but I believe it's Bet. I don't know. For we are no longer who we are. For a time, we live and rule again at Dax.
Now look above the Unknown Soldier there. He's in his little beast outfit. Now look directly above his head. That's got a naked lady.
That's a completely naked woman. You're right. What is going on here?
No wonder.
Wow.
You and your chums love this, Miles Watson. When you're not.
And-
Yeah, in retrospect, perhaps that was the real appeal.
Before the internet, Miles had to
Jeez.
rely on Unknown Soldier comics.
And like, just for the listeners out there, this is, I mean, granted, it is a small panel, but this woman, you can completely see that she's naked, and you can see her vagina, hairless. But it's there. It's right there, plain as day. Wow. Anyway, okay, back to the story. So then the Nazis break through the wall, and then Unknown Soldier and Jade fight back. Unknown Soldier's got the monster costume on. He's fighting. And then, we see a little cool Batman ad for Twinkies. But anyway, back to the story. So then,
and he's basically a monster at this point. Like it's not like they're shooting him with guns, and they're not stopping him at all.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And then the officer tries to take a shot at Jade, and she just uses like her sword to.
I thought it was a sword as well, but I think it's just a magic like bolt that she shoots out. Like.
Okay.
Instead of the next panel, she shoots.
No, it's definitely a sword.
Yeah, because it has the hilt and
there's a
everything.
sword down
Maybe
below.
it's like maybe she's shooting something with the sword.
Well, you later see her use it again. Although I guess I understand where Mike's coming from on that, but in a later panel, it's pretty clearly a rapier.
Yeah, apparently it's a sword that can shoot lasers.
Right.
Right.
That's the least of the logical problems of this tale.
Yeah.
But like, is it shooting lasers or is it just growing very long and cutting things? I don't know. I'm confused.
Yeah, I don't know.
Either way, doing something with it.
So yeah, so then we see like there's like mounted. They kind of look like bear heads, like they come off the walls and like falling on the soldiers.
Yeah, she knocks them off the walls with her sword/laser gun.
Right, and then the monster is still fighting these Nazis.
And he's just like ripping their throats out and shit.
Right, and then and then outside. See, this is where it gets weird because now all of a sudden they're like outside, like really far away from the castle, and now he's attacking this Panzer division of tanks. And then she's out there too, helping them fight, and they're fighting all these Nazis. And
she's controlling the trees. Like the trees are turning into
Yes.
living creatures that are grabbing the tanks and grabbing the soldiers and throwing them everywhere. So this is where it becomes very like a horror comic book.
Right. So it's justified.
These trees are murdering these Nazis.
Right. And then he's. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just saying they're like ripping their heads off, throwing them into walls, choking them.
Right.
Yeah.
And then we see the tanks going towards the castle, and then Jade makes like the gargoyles like spill blood out of their mouths, and it drowns all the soldiers.
That's right.
And we see them like dead bodies floating in the river of blood here.
Yeah, it gets pretty graphic there at the end.
Right.
Drowning in
Yeah, they're
blood.
literally drowning in blood.
Right.
Hey,
Yeah.
Miles Watson, you're a horror movie aficionado. Has that scene ever been done in a horror movie? People drowning in blood like that?
In blood? No, I think I saw a movie where a wicked guy who was like robbing, he was out for gold in Africa or whatever. He got drowned by gold, like buried alive in treasure.
Huh.
I can't remember any horror movie
Yeah.
where somebody drowns in blood, and I could be mistaken, but I don't think I've ever seen one.
Yeah,
where somebody goes that way.
It's not just like blood in a bathtub. We're talking blood all over the countryside. Like they're outside, right? So it's like a flood of blood.
It might be like a moat. I think it's like a moat, but still, it's a lot. Yeah.
It's a lot of blood.
Yep.
Yeah, so.
And so then now that they're all floating dead bodies, it's the perfect time to reunite and kiss.
Yeah, she kisses them. She's just kissing bandages.
Right. Yeah, that's true. That's true. And so he kind of like peels back his mask and he's like, ma belle. And she's like, mon bête. And then we see them now back in their regular clothes, walking away from this scene of destruction. But then we cut back to the costumes in the castle, and they're actually talking to each other. And the princess costume says, "So we wait again, mon bête?" And the bed costume says, "Oui, ma belle, till someone else comes to our tower and has need of us." So yeah, they're like intelligent costumes.
Yeah, when they're walking away, Jade and the unknown soldier, he's carrying a surrender flag.
Yes, he is.
He's carrying a truce flag so he can get through the Allied lines.
Yeah, because the Allied tank show. And then he says, "It was necessary, Jade, a debt of honor. Without those two enchanted costumes, it would be we who lie dead at Chateau Dax." So enchanted costumes. So Miles Watson, when you tune into a World War II adventure story, you will always love to see enchanted costumes. Isn't that the one thing you want?
I did get a but actually, if you notice, the rapier takes a very prominent position in the panel on the left.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Look at that.
So her princess costume and rapier is there on the left, and the beast is hanging on the wall like a skin, really.
Right.
Yeah. How long was this story here?
This story is 17 pages, actually.
Oh, really? Because it seems
Yeah,
shorter.
it feels shorter.
Yeah, it seems like there's scenes missing almost. Like there are maybe not scenes, but panels. Definitely there's panels missing throughout.
The one thing I noticed about this is it feels like every one or two panels is a new scene. So they're moving very quickly, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
It's actually astonishing how fast this moves. When I selected this, I actually had forgotten how this comic is divided into stories, sort of like Haunted Tank was. Haunted Tank was very similar. They had one main story, and then they would have two or three other war-related stories, but they could be from different wars or what have you, to fill up. Sometimes they would have two stories with the same group of characters, and they always had some variations. But I had forgotten how this was only one of, I think, three here, but then it is 17 pages long, so it feels like a 5-page story.
Right.
But it's 17 pages long, so it's, I don't know, I mean, I guess that's kind of a compliment.
Yeah. Moves quick.
Yeah.
So some of the stories we've done feel really long.
Yeah. Usually,
and you're like, how can this be a comic? How can it be a comic? It's like, I've been here 2 hours and I just don't see the end.
Well, and this is the key thing I noticed, is that you could argue that Bob Haney's script is silly, but it was never boring. It was never confusing. It was never, it would pull you through the story. So I definitely give it that. And
I really like Dick Ayers' art here. I like old school comic book art.
Oh, yeah.
Definitely old school.
This is really good art, yeah.
Yeah. Miles, how did you feel about the art here?
Some of it's very good. I actually, to go all the way back to the beginning, if we may, on the front page, the splash page, I really like when the beast is charging at the audience with the castle in the background.
Yeah.
His arms are kind of flung either behind him, out, or in front of him. I actually kind of think of it's behind him. You can see his mouth. He's got one leg raised. He's got the devil tail. And you have the spooky castle sitting on top of that huge crag of rock beneath the full moon. Nothing makes me happier in a comic book or any other artistic format when an artist is able to put a lot into a little.
Yeah, because it's very simple. It's a very simple design and image. Like, it's not a lot of detail,
and yet it's simple, and yet it's very crowded. It's crowded without being busy. It's packed without being, just gibberish, too much. There's a fine art to it. And I also was impressed, as I think you guys probably were too, with his use of shadow strategically.
Yeah. Cover
to
those
show
nipples.
nudity.
Right. Well, the other thing I noticed is this type of art, the way, like I said, how 1 to 2 panels per scene, like that's a very fast moving story. It's almost like every panel has enough information for a complete scene, right? So you're seeing a lot of background details that it's more than just like a single shot. It's like a complete story. And it reminds me of Mad Magazine. So I just looked up John Severin, and I didn't even realize this. He's one of the founding cartoonists for Mad Magazine in 1952, and he worked for Cracked Magazine for 45 years. So of course it makes sense that it would remind me of Mad Magazine then, right?
Well, this is Dick Ayers, not John Severin. But
Well, wait, I thought this was John. Where am I getting John Severin from?
he does the Aces story. I think.
Oh, there you go. There you go. Okay.
So we'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah,
not
okay.
to confuse you. I'm like, yeah, this is our buddy Dick Ayers. Here.
Okay.
I also just again I love the Unknown Soldier's look, the whole face bandages thing, but also whenever he's not in disguise, he wears like a long trench coat and a fedora. And
Right.
That's a good look.
Definitely.
Kind of like who's that guy? Rorschach, right?
Rorschach, yes, from Watchmen.
Yeah. So it's kind of like Negative Man and Rorschach combined.
Right. So that was the first story.
Yeah, that was just the first.
He
story.
does look like Rorschach. Why didn't I see that before? He's got the fedora, the bandaged face, the trench coat. Wow, that stunned me into silence for a second when you said that.
So we got 2 more stories to go. These are short. We'll breeze through these, right, Michael?
Sure.
These real quick.
So, so we all agreed the first one was good then.
Yeah, we'll give our reviews. At the end.
Okay. So the second one, so this is written by Bob Haney, and it's drawn by Rick Estrada. I'm not sure if you did research on him. You want to talk about him? Okay, but I'm judging by his name. I'm going to guess that he's one of the infamous Filipino artists that they used around this time in DC. There's a lot of Filipino artists.
I was thinking he was a member of CHIPS.
Oh, yeah.
California.
Maybe you're right, and I'm wrong. So yeah, this art, completely different style. This is more like, I don't know how you describe this. It's very
more cartoony, I would say.
Yeah, but it's cartoony, but it's like, well, if there was an art history major here, they'd know. But there's a certain name for this type of style where it's very it's not shadowy. It's more designy, more liney. There's like a lot of lines and shapes, not shadows, I would say. Although there is shadows, but not as much. But anyway, so basically it starts out. So this is one of those stories that starts out with a splash page. It's actually from the middle of the story, right? It's called "They Rode to the Sound of the Guns," and it opens up with a red-headed rebel soldier shooting a black northern soldier dead. And another soldier's like, "Ezekiel, you've killed him in cold blood." And then the southern soldier's like, "As I will any slave what fights against the South, Captain." And then we flash back, and then the rest of the story is basically a flashback. And this is a very interesting premise. So we've got a plantation in Kentucky where a father's got his 2 sons, and they're both going to go to war, but they're each going to fight on different sides of the Civil War. And then the same guy has also got 3 slaves living with him, and there's the father and 2 sons, and those 2 sons are also going to go fight, right, on both sides or on either side of the war. Yes. So then they ride off in pairs, one to the south, one to the north, and then we go ahead.
Oh, I didn't say anything.
Oh, I thought I heard a noise. So then anyway, so they're riding off, and they get. So we're following the guys from the north, and then they get ambushed by some soldiers from the south. So then this trigger happy guy is like, "Looky what we got here, a slave in a blue belly uniform. My name ain't Sergeant Snipes." So he starts mouthing off to the black soldier, and he ends up.
Read what he says, Michael.
Okay, sure. Corporal Ezekiel Gume, United States Army, and to you, white trash. What? No black devil can fight against the South. I'm going to shoot you, boy. And then another soldier comes in. He's like, Sergeant, you can't. It's against the rules of war. We're your prisoners. But then the guy ends up shooting the black soldier anyway, like right in the throat, basically, like the chest.
And what does he say there, Michael?
He says, no. Oh, you mean, the white trash guy? Yes. Yeah. If the dark son of Satan were truly a soldier, but no slave can be a fighting man, you're going to die, slave.
I just want to point out, Michael improvised all that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. The dark son of Satan.
Michael just invented that. That's not.
None of that's actually there. So then in the background, we see the same blonde soldiers like, no! And we see the soldier, like the black soldier falling back. And then, hold on a sec here.
All I was trying to do, Michael, is to convince our readership or our listeners that you are a racist.
And a bigot, yep, exactly. So then we see the blonde soldier standing over the dead body of the black soldier, and he's all like upset, obviously. And then all of a sudden, we see the other two soldiers from the beginning. They kind of ride in on their horses, and
it's his brother.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah. So the white brother and the black brother. So then the white brother's like, my God, what's going on here? Wyatt, is that you, brother? And he's like, Clay, Mose. And then they look over at the red-bearded white trash guy. We'll just call him the white trash guy. Like, Snipes, you shot Ezekiel for wearing the Union blue? Yes, sir, Lieutenant. One less enemy to the south. So then the brother of the black brother that just got killed gets pissed off and starts running after the white trash guy with a sword. And then what happens? Well, the white trash guy shoots him in the head. And this is pretty graphic because he shoots him in the head, and we see like pieces of the guy's hat, like the hat's like disintegrating, and it almost implies it's like brains. I mean, it probably is brains, but
yeah, it looks like the top of his head got blown off.
Yeah, it's kind of like
his forehead is cut short there. So.
Yeah, very graphic.
Hey, real quick though, Michael, if you pan up to the previous page, there's an ad for do you see Batman there?
Yeah.
And then over to the left, look, it's Eric Estrada from Chips.
What a coincidence! Right. Wow.
He drew this. And he's also there, yeah.
So then, so now we got two people dead. And so everyone, so then all of a sudden, 24 muskets poke through the green wall around them. You're all surrounded. Surrender, Rev. So now this is northern soldiers, and they're surrounding them, and they're basically finding out what's going on. And then they're like, well, I have orders from General Grant. A rebel officer is responsible for his men's actions. It is a crime of war and punishable by immediate execution. And so they all surround the.
Basically, the brother from the south is now going to be killed by firing squad,
right?
Because he allowed his soldier to murder Ezekiel in cold blood.
Right. So they're like, they all surround him. They draw their guns. Firing squad form up, and then we cut to this really wide shot of them shooting, and we see the guy fall over. And in the foreground, there's all these birds flying away, scared away by the gunshot. It's a pretty cool shot. But then, just as that happens, the blonde soldier turns around and he sees the red-headed white trash guy running away. And in his thoughts, he's like, the real murderer must not escape. So then he chases after him in like the swamp and catches up with him, and he murders him in the swamp. It's like a one-panel knife fight.
Yeah, well, they both die in that swamp.
Ah, they both die. Okay.
Yeah.
So then we cut over back to the plantation, and we see a funeral, and we see the two fathers standing there, and the white father's like, 4 bodies in one grave, Colonel, and a single headstone without names. It's unheard of. And the black father's like, Jonah and I know who lies, your reverend, and they know who they were from now until grass covers the sun, from now until great Gume meets at the river's end. And it shows the tombstone, and it just says, brothers.
Yeah, the reverend was the one saying it's unheard of. And then,
yes.
So the two fathers, they buried their sons together in one grave. Miles Watson, this is the most horrific story I've ever read.
It is brutal and sad, and I remember being very rattled by it as a kid.
Yeah.
Like I was not fully prepared when I read this. I remember, and it's funny the way lines will stick with you your entire life. The line, A bony finger tightens on the trigger of a Colt Dragoon.
Wow.
I never forgot that sentence. All these years, I never forgot that sentence because it opens up with somewhere in the South, one blah, blah, blah. A bony finger tightens on the trigger of a Colt Dragoon. And that never left my mind. But this, this is brutal. The very first panel is one man murdering another, and you're going to die slave and then killing him, right? And then we go back through the story, and then we see him again shot through both the head and the brain, because the bullet goes through his solar plexus, throat, his entire head, like as if he were lying in bed and you put a gun under his chin. So, I mean, like, that's brutal. And then there's another killing where he blasts the other dude in the head, and you see his hat explode out the crown. So he took it through the brain as well.
Right.
And then the other brother is gunned down by a firing squad. And
then the Union guys show up, and you think, the Union guys show up, and you think, like, oh, it's safe, but then they murder they execute the other guy.
Terrible.
And then the last two guys fight to the death in the swamp, and I was like, good God, like, just in a couple pages, you've had all this killing and a terribly sad ending.
It's horrible. It's horrible. So there it is. That's that story. Real heartwarming tale. And now we got one more.
That's
Enemy
right.
Ace.
Yes. So this is written by Robert Kanigher and drawn by John Severin.
Yes, John Severin.
And this is now a completely different style. I guess you'd call this like a more realistic art style.
Yeah, it's like flat and stiff, but I like it though.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, it's almost like an old illustrated, it's like more illustrative, I guess you could say, less cartoony. And so, and the other thing too is it's almost like a not silent, but it's a lot of...
When you said that though, Michael, didn't we do an Enemy Ace story from one of them Christmas with the superhero?
Yes, we did. Christmas with the superheroes. Where it actually was silent.
Yeah, it was all silent in that story. No dialogue at all, yeah.
So this is narrated by... is this Enemy Ace? Yeah. Yes. Baron Hans von Hammer.
Now, explain the Enemy Ace. He was basically, what's that fella? The Red Baron, right? That's basically what he is.
Yeah, I believe so, yeah.
They're just ripping off the Red Baron. But he's a German pilot, and he's like the hero of these stories.
It is interesting. Yes, you're right. That is interesting.
What? So
he's stealing a plane, a biplane, from the... I read this. I don't remember it at all.
Well, basically what happened, I'll summarize it real quickly here.
There you go.
The Enemy Ace, he was wounded, and because he was so wounded, the Germans, they said, well, we can't let people know that our Enemy Ace was wounded because that would undermine our morale. So they find a doppelganger, a guy that looks just like the Enemy Ace, and they start flying him out on missions saying that he's the Enemy Ace, but he really isn't. So then the real Enemy Ace, he finds out that other Enemy Ace isn't exactly fighting according to the codes of honor.
Right.
He's kind of a scoundrel up in the sky there. So the real Enemy Ace steals a plane. He's still wounded. He's got his head wrapped up like the Unknown Soldier a little bit. And he flies his plane to take down the doppelganger there. And he eventually kills that guy, takes his plane back, and now he's the Enemy Ace again. That's basically what it is. Right.
But yeah, it's very, like we said, different style. It's... the art's very realistic. Like, there's some really nice shots of the planes. Like, and then there's also
the engine. Yeah, beautifully drawn engines.
Yep, very detailed. And I also want to point out, there's actually a really nice shot near the beginning where there's a huge, like a really wide shot of the plane, like really small in the sky, and it's just like a nice choice to have that shot in there, And then the rest of it is just dogfights and just planes like flying around each other. It's just really well done. The closest thing I would say is there's an artist named Russ Heath from this era, and he had a similar art style, I would say. But yeah, this is really good.
Miles Watson, how do you feel about the Enemy Ace?
It's a confusing story, in my estimation. It's well drawn, and I like the combat. I especially thought it was a bold choice, that one blank panel where you just see the climbing aircraft.
The one I mentioned, is that like the wide one, you mean?
Yeah, it's a rectangular. Well, on this page, there's him with a nurse, It's a very well-drawn panel,
Yep,
hugging a
that's
nerd. Then there's a very creative panel of he's got the face of the imposter has assumed the character of a propeller.
right.
So as he's riding, and you have this beautifully drawn engine and propeller, you've got the imposter's face. There's like 6 faces blurring, and then you have a completely blank rectangular panel with just the Fokker flying into the sky. This tiny little
just
sketch
to
of
be
a plane.
clear, you said Fokker, not fucker.
Right.
Well,
Right.
Just to be clear.
There's a good story about that, but at any rate, and then there's a little commentary panel there in the left, at full throttle, blah blah blah. Then you have a nice drawing of the diving squadron of British aircraft, and it's quite a page.
Right.
This is a very brief story, and it's a little confusing because it's a German fighting his own imposter, who is he's hunting his own imposter down, and in the middle of a fight against the British, he's hunting his imposter
Because the
who is
imposter,
fighting the British.
yeah, because the British, the one guy in the British plane, he runs out of ammunition, so he waves off, says, "Hey, I'm out of ammunition." So by the code of honor, you should let him go, because now it's no longer a fair duel. But the imposter guy was still going to go kill him. So the enemy ace blocks his path to that and forces the enemy ace to let the imposter to land. But he actually fatally wounded the imposter as well. But so you can't. It's okay to kill the enemies, but you have to make sure they have a fighting chance. It has to be done by moral code.
Which I actually, when this comic was in my possession as a 10-year-old, I asked my mom. I was in my kitchen, my mom's kitchen, and I said, "Mom, if somebody just put their hands up in the middle of an air duel, the other person would stop shooting." And she was like, "No, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life." She's like, "Dude, they would have killed that guy immediately." And I thought, oh, wow, okay.
But yeah, man, this art is pretty. The way he draws the airplanes is spectacular. And
Right.
I like the panel on the bottom of page 6 there when just the guy staring straight into the camera, shooting the guns. He's got that. This is it's interesting art, but it's very good.
Yeah, it is. Yep.
Enemy ace.
Yep. Second enemy ace story we've done.
And I feel so honored to have done it.
Yeah.
So Miles Watson, overall, what do you think of this Unknown Soldier book? Do you like the 3-story format?
Well, to be honest, I think they carried it off here. I'm not sure in my other experiences with this and other comics where you have multiple stories crammed into a single, not terribly long comic book overall, that it works. But I think you have 3 pretty good stories here. I think they pulled it off. I don't know if they pull this off every time, but I think they pulled it off here.
Yeah, I enjoyed it for the most part. Listen, I love the Unknown Soldier. I love the character. I love the way he looks. I love the idea of it. The story itself with the enchanted costumes, not a huge fan.
No, it's ridiculous, but it's not. It is not characteristic of the Unknown Soldier that I am familiar with. So I kind of give it a pass, thinking that maybe, granted it's a March issue, that would have been much more appropriate for October. Yeah, for sure.
But there was a lot of Nazis drowning in blood. That's always something.
Yeah, it's not subtle. I mean, he's got the Nazis are literally drowning in blood. And when the guy's like, "What is this disgusting tide?" the woman's like, "Blood of all the people you slaughtered for conquest." Like it's not subtle.
Blood. By the way, explain real quick what a Fokker is, because people are, I'm sure, confused by that.
In World War I, one of the big airplane manufacturers in Germany, and actually they made planes, I believe, even for like the Dutch in the interwar period after World War I. But the Fokker was a major manufacturer of airplanes in World War I. They made some very good ones, and the Fokker triplane, I think, was the Red Baron's plane, actually, as a matter of fact. But the D3 or whatever, I'm not an expert on that subject, but the Fokker was a big manufacturer of military aircraft during the First World War for Germany. And there is actually a funny story during World War II. A British fighter ace, a very famous British fighter ace, was describing a dogfight over Britain during the Battle of Britain. And he was like, there were 20 of these fuckers on my left, and there were 20 of these fuckers on my right, and there were 20 of these fuckers behind me. And of course, this is like 1940. So him using this language was very scandalous. So the school teacher, and he was addressing a bunch of girls who were in like the equivalent of high school. And she's like, Fokker is a, just so you know, ladies, he's referring to a plane of German manufacturer. And the guy was like, ma'am, I know a fucker when I see one. It didn't go over too well with the British prep school of 1940 wasn't particularly pleased, but he was like, no, ma'am, they were fuckers, and I know a fucker when I see one. But this is innocent.
So, Mike L., what do you think of The Unknown Soldier? 1 out of 10, what do you give it?
Like the whole issue?
Yeah, do the whole issue.
I give it a 7.5. Just because the art is so good in each story, and even though it's obviously aimed at a younger audience, I think that, I don't know, I think overall it's entertaining for sure. It's good.
I wasn't crazy about the art in the Eric Estrada.
Okay.
The other two I like. Yeah, I'd give it a 7 out of 10 as well. Again, I'm a big fan of the Unknown Soldier, the character. Miles Watson, what do you think?
I would, I'm going to go ahead, even though the plot of the Unknown Soldier one is ridiculous. I mean, really ridiculous. I'm going to go ahead and give this an 8, and here's why.
That's your childhood favorite. You remember this?
Is it really an 8? No. But I honestly think that between the fact that the first story moves that fast in 17 pages is pretty astonishing, because we have done some comics that were about 17 pages long and it felt like they were 100 pages long. And I just didn't believe that they would ever come back. Like, I was like, how could is this ever going to end? Like, look, God. So that feeling as fast as it does, I think is a testament to at least there are some stories that maybe aren't the best stories, but they're told so efficiently and so skillfully in this sense of within what they are, that they're actually like, that's a blink if you miss it story. So I'm willing to ignore the utter absurdity and ridiculousness of it, and the fact that it's out of character for Unknown Soldier, as I remember. I also like the art. And then I like the Civil War story a lot. It's a little too short, but it's heavy-handed, but it's a comic book. It's trying to make a point about a lot of things, about racism, about war, about people killing people, and for no reason, and all this kind of thing. And then the last story is a little confusing, but the way it's written is, the way it's illustrated and everything is so beautiful. And I just overall, one of the things that attracted me to this type of comic when I was 10 years old was that you got a great deal for one comic. Right. There's a lot to think about here. There's a lot to chew on here. True. You've got a World War I story, a Civil War story, and a World War II story. And very interestingly, the World War II story, the Nazis are these cartoons. They're saying, Jawohl, and they're drawn in this ridiculous way. Sort of cartoonishly and everything. But then you have the World War I story where the German is the main character, and he's got this very honorable, rigidly honorable way of looking at everything. So there's a lot to unpack here.
Yeah, it's a lot of entertainment for 60 cents.
Yeah,
I agree.
I mean, it's that to me when I was a kid, because you waited a month or more, probably 6 weeks for these comics to come out. And I would go to the store and spin the rack and get so frustrated, because when you're a kid, a week is like a year.
Right.
So waiting 5 or 6 weeks for the next round of comics was just agonizing. And to take a Marvel or DC comic home and read it in 15 minutes and be like, I waited 6 weeks for this shit. That was, because some of them sucked, and you'd be very disappointed. So I really appreciated these types of comics that were really crammed with stuff. And I feel like this just isn't crammed with crap. All these stories had some merit. So I'm going to go ahead and give it an 8, even though it's really about a 7.
Also, Also, naked ladies.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All right.
And I want to give a shout out to Mike L of Canada for pointing out the nudity.
My pleasure.
Yeah. Sorry, there it is, the Unknown Soldier for 261. Give it a whirl if you're so inclined. All right, Mike L, next week, Shocktober continues with your pick.
That's right. And we're going to continue the theme established by Miles Watson of DC anthologies. And we're going to pick House of Mystery number 294. I just sent you
Mystery.
Yes.
294. Now, is House of Mystery the one that has that fella named Kane?
Actually, yes, he's on the opening page. Yep.
Because Bob Haney co-created that guy.
Doesn't surprise me.
I
Yep.
also read that.
This is from
House of Mystery.
Yeah, 1981. This is going to be a good one.
I doubt it. What's it like? Any?
Well, this is the ghost monster story. It's Shocktober themed, so yeah. There you go. All right.
Miles Watson, thank you, buddy. And again, go to Amazon.com or OneNineBooks.com. Buy all his books. Winter's Cross, Harry Dead of Winter, Cage Life, Knuckle Down, Devils You Know.
That's right. I'm being very fertile lately, as Mike Dell will attest. I'm throwing every week. He sees an email from me, and he's like, "Shit, guy sent me another fucking thing that I have to read and pretend I don't hate it and that it doesn't suck."
Yeah, keep an eye out.
It's a burden.
All right. Okay. Well, yeah. I want to thank Miles Watson for joining us for Shocktober Part 1. Thank you again. You could find
Milestober.
You can find every episode of Flea Market Fantasy at www.comicbooksyndicate.com. We review Bronze Age comics from the 70s and 80s. 1 week I pick, 1 week Mike Dell picks, 1 week Miles Watson picks. And until next Tuesday, disperse!